And I'm one of the editors-in-chief of the Comparative Literature Publication Association. Welcome to the CLPA's Honors Thesis Panel event. We run two premier humanities publications, the Comparative Literature Undergraduate Journal, which publishes research papers and honors theses, and Vagabond Multilingual Magazine, which publishes multilingual creative works. If any of you are interested in joining our editorial teams in the spring or submitting to the publications, you can check us out at ucbcludge.org. I will put that link in the chat.
And meanwhile, hi, I'm Roxana. I'm the other EIC of CLPA. So today we are so excited to be hosting this panel for you all and to provide resources on how to conduct humanities research. So if any of you are interested in accessing the resources that we mentioned today, please fill out the Google form that Perlene just sent, and we are going to send you the abstract, the sample prospectus, and the recording of this event after the meeting.
We'll start by going over the presentation that Nina Rennert-Cohen, the undergraduate major advisor for the Comparative Literature Department, has prepared for us. So again, if you'd like to access this presentation, feel free to fill out the Google form. And if you have any lingering questions for Nina, feel free to ask them in the form, and we'll compile a Q&A for if there are frequently asked questions. So.
Okay, so Nina, our major advisor, cannot be with us today. So Perlene and I are going to deliver this presentation on behalf of her. It's about pursuing an honors thesis with a specific emphasis on comparative literature, but anyway, the procedure is applicable to other majors as well. So yeah, so firstly, the requirements. So you have to be writing the honors thesis in a major that you are pursuing. So if you are in comparative literature, you technically should not be writing an honors thesis in poli-sci and vice versa. There are also, for some majors, there is a GPA requirement for honors thesis. For comparative literature, it is 3.55 GPA overall plus 3.65 major GPA. Also, you need to be at least a junior in order to do honors thesis. Next slide. As for the procedures, first, you need to have a thesis advisor 1 semester in advance. So this advisor should be someone who has expertise in your area of research. And it will be nice if you have already taken a class with them, or if you already have a working relationship with them. Secondly, you need to complete the application and submit it for approval before the end of the add drop deadline of the semester in which you intend to conduct the research. Thirdly, you need to customize your own units for the honors research. So, which means that you need to assign yourself the units. If you assign yourself 1 unit, that means you are going to put in 3 hours of work into writing a thesis per week. If you give yourself 4 units, that means 12 hours per week.
This is specific to the comparative literature department, but just like Roxana said, you would first contact a thesis advisor 1 semester in advance. One thing to note is that does not have to be a member of the complit department. So your faculty member of choice could be part of your primary or secondary language. The next thing is to complete a prospectus, which is basically a research proposal. You'll decide with your advisor if you'll write the thesis in 1 semester or 2 semesters for a total of 6 units if you choose to write it in 2 semesters. And then finally, you'll submit the thesis proposal with signatures to the undergraduate major advisor before the end of the add drop period. Again, as Roxana mentioned, you would make sure to sign up for the correct amount of units based on how much you plan to be working on your thesis per week, for a total of 30 to 50 pages for 1 semester and 40 to 60 pages for 2 semesters. And then finally, completion of the comparative literature honors thesis will put you in consideration for honors or highest honors by the department chair once you have finished the thesis. So final food for thought that Nina has left for you all is to consider building on a paper you have already written in an earlier class. utilize ours or the Office of Undergraduate Research and Scholarships as a resource. They have workshops and peer helpers with experience. And one other thing is that they have several programs available for those interested in starting their honors thesis research early. And finally, consider submitting your work to the Undergraduate Research Symposium in the Complit department or the Comparative Literature Undergraduate Journal, which is our publication, because we are peer reviewed, and it is a great way to add that you were published or you spoke in a conference on your resume. Finally, we have examples of Complit honors theses and a sample research prospectus that you can access at the end of the meeting. You can also email the owner of the research prospectus, who is a current senior at Berkeley, if you have specific questions about their research.
Okay, now that we have covered the logistics of writing an honors thesis, we also have for today 3 speakers who are going to introduce their honors thesis writing process. 2 of them are from the English department and 1 was a former agri student. Our 3 speakers, please introduce yourselves.
Hi everyone. I'm Ron Godoy. I'm actually double majoring in English and comparative literature, and I'm in my senior year. In comparative literature, I work with Spanish and English. In Spanish, I mostly focus in poetry, but I also work with the Latin American boom. And in English, I work with modernism, and I have been associated with the Comparative Literature Publication Association for 2 years.
Hi everyone, I'm Phee. I'm currently a graduate student in the Department of Ancient Greek and Roman Studies. I was in the department as an undergrad as well, and I wrote my thesis under Professor Kathleen McCarthy, and I wrote on the poetry of Catullus, Gaius Valerius Catullus, focusing on gender and translation.
Hey everyone, I'm Fernando. I'm an English major. This is my last semester. I was an editor for Cluj last spring, and I'm a senior advisor now. And yeah.
Awesome. So we'll get started with some pre-prepared questions from the editorial board, and then we'll open it up to an audience Q&A after. So yeah, I think the biggest question that we'll start off with is why write a research paper?
Well, I think that writing a research paper is it's a fantastic opportunity to synthesize all the knowledge that we go through as undergraduates. But I think that it's also it's a different experience than taking classes and engaging with a text that you are given or with a topic that you are given to write, and you can actually explore your own interest. And also challenge yourself as a writer to learn about the research process, to read different articles, theory, and to learn how to develop an argument, to synthesize all the things that you read to put together an argument. It's a big challenge, and it's a very exciting challenge as a writer, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really great opportunity to kind of hone in on something that sparked your interest, over the course of your studies, and a really good way to kind of, feel out what research would look like for you if you wanted to pursue it, and to, really delve into whatever topic you feel like you may not have had the chance to really deeply explore. And I think for a lot of people, it definitely varies what level of sort of exposure you have to the topic you end up working on, but either way, it's like such a deep dive that it feels completely different and like much more kind of self-directed. So there's a lot of, kind of like Ron was saying, there are lots of lots of ways that you can kind of make the experience your own in a way that is very different from other things in undergrad.
I would also say that it's great to be able to define your own topic. I think that was like a primary motivator for me, especially if you have a topic in mind that you're interested in and you feel like it hasn't been covered in a class. It's a great opportunity then. And also to just challenge yourself to write something that's longer than probably anything you've written so far. So I think it's a really good learning opportunity.
Awesome. So all of you guys have mentioned the exhilaration of pursuing a topic of your own choice. So our second question is, how did you guys choose your topics and how did you tailor your research interest to a specific research question?
It was kind of a complex process. I actually didn't have like a clear idea of what I was going to write about. Especially because my interest was not very focused on a period or on a genre or on an object, but it was more focused on theory. I had taken like literary theory classes before, and I was very fascinated with narratology specifically and Marxism. So I was not sure. I had like an initial idea of working with poetry and maybe masculinity studies, and I tried to find an object of study, but it was not clicking. So I talked to some different professors, and actually I was not finding what I was expecting. So I ended up changing my topic, and it was more not focused on the object, but on the knowledge that I had in literary theory. So at that moment, I was rereading Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, and I was very fascinated by that text because of how many limits it crosses. It crosses geographic limits, temporal limits. At the end of a century, it also incorporates different genres. So it's a very rich text. I was also reading some criticism about it. So I decided to work with the text without having a very clear idea of what I was going to talk about. But I had a very general idea. But I guess that the research question came after reading. It just popped up after reading and reading criticism. So it's not that I had an idea, but I guess that the question came after reading a lot of criticism focused on the book. Yes.
Yeah, I think I kind of knew going into deciding that I wanted to write a thesis what I wanted to work on. I, was obsessed with Catullus in high school, so I kind of had that precedent to work off of. And I knew that if I was going to do a big research project like that, it was going to be on Catullus. So that narrowed things down a lot for me. But, even with knowing generally the author and the area that I wanted to work on, there was just so much that I wanted to cover that like trying to narrow the scope of the project actually was a huge part of the process. And yeah, I think your research question doesn't necessarily get decided before you start working on it. Like it can kind of change throughout the process and, change in scope, especially like things that you think that you're going to be able to address or ask, maybe like you don't have space for, or you have to adjust and rearrange. And so that, having that in mind, I think would be something that like would have really helped me as I was starting the process of kind of narrowing down my topic.
To choose my topic, I gravitated towards just generally the author and the work that I found most interesting at first, because I figured if I'm going to spend the time with this, I want it to be something that I really am like fascinated by. So I had a specific poet in mind, and then I did review most of the poems that they wrote, and then I just noticed that there were some that I thought about more. And then as I read scholarly literature on those poems or on related topics, that's when I began to pick up what questions were most pressing for the issues and what things were being left out. And so that's just like a gradual process.
Awesome. That leads us to, or ties in nicely to our next question, actually, which was what your research process was throughout the experience, and then also how you stayed on topic during your research process.
My research process, I guess that I focus a lot on reading. I was trying to read as much criticism as I could on Heart of Darkness, and try to read in a way that it's a little bit different than for maybe when taking classes. It was more like a reading, trying to find like gaps and on or try to get a sense of what the conversation was about the novel that I was working on. Um, well, I also try to put myself some structure. Try to read every day. Try to read previous. I was trying to read at least one article every day. Sometimes it didn't happen, but I was trying. Try to write at least every weekend. Um, Even if I didn't have like a clarity on what to write, I still try to write. Try to do close readings. Because sometimes like that like reverse engineering gives you like insight. I guess that something about my research process was also trying to read not only articles that were focused on the book, but also I was trying to read what was being done in the department, in the comparative literature department. So reading theory to get like a sense of where theory is right now, and to try to maybe um, try to be original, or try at least to attempt to be original, like considering like the limitations that this is an undergraduate thesis, and it's not a graduate thesis, but yeah, I guess that's a general sense.
Yeah, I mean, my research process, I think, was a little bit wonky, mostly because a lot of the background research for the kind of area that I chose, I felt like I had already done a lot of, and then as it turned out, you know, I was working much more broadly than I probably should have been, and covering a much kind of broader range of material than I, you know, could feasibly do as an honors thesis. And so there was a huge amount that I did, and you know, a huge amount of literature that I ended up looking at that did not get included in the thesis ultimately. And you know, that happened at many different stages of the process, at like kind of the earlier stages when I was just kind of looking around, and then, you know, even up until, you know, towards the editing stage, where I was really thinking about what could stay and what could go. And you know, throughout that entire time, I was definitely always thinking about how to rearrange things, and you know, what made the most sense for the kind of project that I wanted to be working on. And I have a terrible time staying on topic. Like, I would just chase like tangential like whatevers all the way down and be like, wow, this could be long enough to be like an entire other chapter of this thesis. And then I was like, okay, no, like I can't do that. But yeah, it's definitely a struggle, and like it completely depends on the project too, like how much you know, how much you have to kind of readjust to kind of streamline back to kind of the original idea, or you know, back to what makes sense for the project.
So I focused my thesis on 2 poems and then their relationships to certain paintings. And so I guess like my focus was pretty clear. As far as research, I looked at scholarly articles and books either on the author or on those specific poems or on related works. And then I just read early on, and I would try to pull onto a doc like 1 or 2 quotes from each source, so that later on, because it's easy to forget things, especially if you're reading a lot, so that later on when I went back to try to work on that particular piece, I could see what stood out to me the most from that article and not have to reread everything. And then once I had read enough, I just began like writing off like the top of my head, whatever came to mind, just go for it. And then, of course, early on, because I knew I would have time to revise, I needed that time. And then once I had written enough, I would think, how can I include what I've read other people say? It doesn't have to be like a linear process. And I think from what I recall, a lot of people have very distinctive processes about how they go about incorporating what they've read into what they've written. Some people like to outline everything, and that really works for them. Others kind of just see what happens and it works out. So it's, yeah.
Awesome. So you guys have shared a lot about how you directed yourself through the honors thesis writing project. And now we want to shift into another aspect of this process, which is, how did you choose a professor to advise you? Who did you choose and why? And also, what was the most important advice they gave you?
Well, one of my advisors was actually teaching the class. It was a seminar class that was also the honor thesis workshop. So my second advisor, I was taking a class with him. Actually, I was rereading Art of Darkness for that class, and well, he's also a specialist in Marxism. So I was working with Marxism. So I think that yeah, that was an important point. And was trusting the process, I think, because it's like it's a difficult process. I think that like the majority of time, at least, you feel that you are like just walking in the dark, but at some point it clicks. And my professor actually told me, just like trust the process and continue reading, and at some point, like everything that you have read is gonna come in front of your eyes, and just like that thesis is gonna build itself. And I didn't believe that, but it happens. I mean, at some point, like everything, all the quotes that you have read, all the information that you have in your mind, it starts just assembling itself in front of you. I swear, I don't know what happens, but it happens. At least it happened for me. Also, like some kind of funny advice that my professor gave me was, imagine that someone is holding a pistol in your head and write. So if someone tells you, you need to write this honor thesis tomorrow, holding a pistol, you would write it. She told me, and it's true. I mean, you need like to write it and write it. And after that, you come back and you start making edits, and yeah, I mean, you're not gonna use everything. My thesis, I also cut a lot of things, and it ended focusing pretty much on a single topic. I was planning to address another one, but the information that the close readings just took me to only one way. So yes, that's my answer.
Yeah, I think also some of the most important advice that I received throughout the process was from my advisor about like just making the leap to writing you know, in any possible way that I could manage. It was definitely, I think it is for a lot of people, one of the hardest parts of the process is just to like start writing. And for me, it was like absolutely paralyzing. And I was like, this project is never going to be what I want it to be. And I have such like, I have all of this stuff laid out, but I just have to actually write it now. And my advisor did a really excellent job of kind of just being like, anything that you can put down, like the earlier you can put it down is better. And you know, had me do all sorts of like silly little like free write type things where I just kind of would write whatever came to mind, and actually send it to her, to my advisor, which was absolutely nerve-wracking, because you like, it's so hard to send like writing that raw to someone you admire so much. But it was incredibly helpful because, you know, she had a better sense of where I was coming from, and I felt less like I had to submit something completely perfect to her. And so it, you know, it was very helpful to like make the process iterative, right? And like to kind of work on things and get feedback as I was working on them, and kind of coming back rather than trying to like pull it all out at once. So, you know, regardless of like the relationship you have with your advisor, I think, you know, some version of that process is super important. And, you know, like, you know, combing back through, and using different like kind of styles of writing to approach your writing process. But yeah.
Yeah, I also definitely shared a lot of like free writes with my advisor. And I agree that the first time I shared it, I was kind of not sure whether I could because I knew that I guess like the first draft, I like to think that it's really meant for the writer, right? It's kind of like your own exercise in expressing yourself, and there's a kind of security that comes with not having to share early writing. But I knew that I had to get it out there just to kind of get the ball rolling. The best advice that I think I got was towards it was once I had already written, I think, the first complete draft, and it was just about how to include like secondary sources and how to engage with other scholars. It was very simple. It's just about like always kind of including other voices, even when you disagree, but still like in a very generative way. So it doesn't seem like it's just like, oh, so and so is wrong, and like, kind of that lens to it. So I think that's more so about kind of like how you present yourself as an author who engages with other thinkers, to do it in a way where it's clearly about like building, right? So that's one thing that I definitely took note of when he mentioned it, and it's still helpful.
Nice. Our next question is, well, all of you kind of touched on this, but when you're dealing with like dense amounts of academic literature, one thing that comes to mind as college students is how you managed your time during this process. So that would be our next question. How did you manage your time?
Yes, I mentioned that I tried to set myself the goal of reading one article a day, and many of those articles were really short, by the way. But I guess that a very important skill that we learned in the workshop was skimming. So it's not that I actually like read the whole thing, but just I guess that when as you start getting an idea of what you're focusing on, you actually don't read the whole thing, but you kind of skim and try to look for what you need. I would say that also a very important skill is following leads. So you're gonna go to the notes a lot and just like follow leads, and that's gonna give you a lot of material to read. So reading, that's the goal that I set myself. I was not able to fulfill that goal every day, but I try to read at least an article a day, or in the weekends a chapter. Sometimes when I was like more advanced in the process, I was trying to write every weekend, and that could be like a close reading, just like even if I didn't have a clear idea, I would try to close read. Um, we were also for the class we were uh, doing a research journal, so I was every day I was trying to write in the journal, trying to think about the novel. I also try to reread the novel. Uh, sometimes I would just like open it randomly, but yes, I mean, I guess that was my process. I usually try to work at nights, just to set a specific space in the library, sometimes in my house, just to sit in the table and work, or either read or either free write, um, and take notes on my research journal.
Yeah, I think the most helpful thing for me was meeting bi-weekly with my advisor. I really made sure to, like, even if I felt like I was behind, I was like, I'm gonna email my advisor and set up a meeting, and that's gonna force me to, like, even just do a little bit more than the last time. And it's also, I think, like, one of the ways that you can feel like you get stuck, or like there isn't enough time to kind of do the work that you want to do. Talking it out with another person, like with your advisor, is incredibly helpful, but like with anyone at all is also super useful. And like there were times where I was just absolutely slogging through sections that I felt like would never get finished and was just spending hour upon hour, like, slaving over them. And, I had maybe a 30-minute conversation with like my brother over the phone. And then I was like, wait, this makes sense now. And then the section was finished in like maybe 2 more hours, right? So, definitely like not thinking too rigidly about your own schedule, I think is also helpful. It totally depends on what sort of like scheduler you are. If you like the structure, you prefer to have like a little bit more fluidity, but I definitely found that it was helpful for me to set a schedule and then remind myself that there were only some parts of that schedule which needed to be like adhered to super strictly, and other parts which were much more flexible and which I could, kind of move around as needed to kind of relieve the pressure of trying to get things done in a very specific way. So yeah, sorry, it's a little all over the place, but those are definitely some things that helped me.
I like to have like at least like an hour in mind to set aside for my thesis. Doesn't mean that I did that like every day, but I definitely had it like noted that more often than not, I would try to do something related to my thesis. And sometimes just thinking about it can also be helpful, especially when it comes to like how to organize certain sections or certain ideas. And I also really benefited from using timers. So once I knew what exactly I had to do that particular day, sometimes in just like 30 minutes, I could really accomplish it if I was focused enough and just, sticking to the task at hand and not getting distracted. Especially with writing, I found that oftentimes I could write like a page single spaced in 30 minutes once I had the quote that I was working with or 2 quotes, and I would just type away and not look back. Doesn't mean that I kept everything. Of course, it was freely written, so a lot of it, was pruned away. But it was very satisfying to be able to, just fulfill that page count and say, okay, I did the work for today, and that is very rewarding because then once you have done it, you kind of are even more motivated to keep on doing it because you feel like it's attainable. So timers were really helpful for me. Yeah, not like a 2-hour timer, like a 3-hour timer, just like a 30-minute session.
Thanks for sharing all those really useful time management skills. Now that all of you have successfully completed the 1 semester or 1 year on your thesis project, we want to ask one last question. So if there's one thing that you could tell yourself from 1 year ago before you completed the honors thesis, what would it be?
Definitely, I think that try to have a very clear idea of when to stop adding information and have a very good sense that I guess that what I want to say is that late in the process, you actually become an expert in that topic, at least in that topic that you are writing about, and you, as you write, you come up with more and more ideas, and you maybe sometimes you want to continue adding or maybe background or supporting information or adding like more sections. But I guess that I would tell myself to stop at some point, like to have a clear idea that I was not going to be able to incorporate everything. But yeah, I would tell myself to give myself enough time to edit. I think that was a big problem with my thesis. I didn't have enough time to edit. Actually, so I started editing like a week before the deadline, and that was insane. So definitely that, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that what I would say to my former self is that like your thesis doesn't have to be perfect, and it like shouldn't be. And that's not to say that like one shouldn't strive to kind of do the best that they feel like they can with their thesis, or try to have as much fun as possible with their thesis, but at least to recognize that it's like a stepping stone in a lot of ways, and that, you know, the work that you've done is like not necessarily intended to be like the be all end all in the topic that you've chosen. And that there's a lot of time and space for those ideas to grow after the thesis is done. And also that it's like an undergraduate thesis, right? It has like time constraints, it has scope restraints, like it's, you know, nobody's gonna, like, I mean, not nobody, but no professor wants to read your like 150-page undergrad thesis. Like, you're gonna want to write something that is digestible and something that is doable and, you know, manageable for the kind of work that you feel like you can do, and the work that you feel like you are supported in doing by your advisors. And yeah, also that like I know that people who write honors theses often are perfectionists and, you know, will kind of strive to do a bunch of work that is maybe not unnecessary, but probably more trouble than it's worth. And so, you know, having a good balance of, you know, really working towards your goals and then also thinking about how you can like maintain your mental health is definitely definitely a very good place to start.
I think I would say two things. One is to try as best as I can to carve a specific time that I'm going to work on my thesis and just stick to that. Like, you know how you go to class from a certain time to a certain time. The same thing can apply for working on a project like this, because sometimes, as long as you can, right? Because I know everybody's schedule is different, but sometimes if, you know, one day in the morning we do the work and then the next day we might do it past noon, or another day like in the evening, it can create a kind of like, you know, we'll see when we do it versus at this time I know I'm going to do it, and that's just a consistent thing to follow. And then aside from that, I would just say that as has already been mentioned, like it's an undergraduate work, so even though it's still like the culmination of this particular stage, it's still something that reflects the current stage and not something that's meant to kind of push you past you know, where you are. I think it's totally meant to be like a work to express, you know, current knowledge and aspirations. When I reread my thesis months after I turned it in, it just looked so different to me. And so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Awesome. Well, that concludes the moderated section of the panel. So now Roxana and I will unpin ourselves and we'll just leave our panelist faces on. If you have any questions, feel free to just raise your hand or pop them in the chat, and then our panelists can divide them as they see fit.
All right, I'm going to invite myself to ask a question. So a question on behalf of myself and other people who may be interested in grad school. So is this your first time writing a long paper?
I mean, between 40 and 60 pages for the English department, yeah, it was definitely my first time writing something in that range.
Same for me. I think that the longest that I had written before was 12 pages, and like, yeah, the thesis was, the requirement was between 40 and 60 for the English thesis.
Yeah, mine also just like kept getting longer, which was really bad because I was like, it can't like be this long. I need to cut it off at some point. But I also had only written something that was more in the range of like 20-30 pages before that. So it was like more than half, more than twice. There's a reason I don't do math. yeah, so it just kind of kept getting longer, and I was like, I've never like wrangled a piece of work this size before, and so I ended up needing a lot of help with like thinking about how to manage that. Yeah.
I'll just add too, if you haven't written something of like this length before, that shouldn't necessarily deter you from doing it, because the way that I thought about it was my thesis will be like multiple 5-page papers in one place, versus I'm going to carve out 40 pages on something. Like it's easier to look at it through small pieces.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that's a very good approach. I also did that. My advisor suggested that to divide it into sections and to think of it like small papers, and that helped a lot. And you will also probably include like theoretical or historical background depending on your thesis, so that's also going to occupy some space.
Yeah, so that is good to know. Yeah, at least assuring, at least to me. So we have at the same time 2 participants who are going to ask questions. So I think Cassandra, you are the first.
I wanted to ask, is there any extra considerations you should take into account regarding the digital humanities, especially if no one in your respective department is involved in the digital humanities? Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if either, Fernando or Ron, if you guys have had any experience with digital humanities specifically, but I definitely know that there were parts of my thesis that I worked on that were like a little bit more in the realm of digital humanities, even if they weren't like fully. And I ended up speaking to not professors, but people with at least a little bit more background in the area as I was writing. I didn't like have anyone advising me who is outside of my department. But like I don't think that it's necessarily like, I don't think you need to have someone outside of your department or specifically in digital humanities like on your committee, depending on how central like that element is to your thesis. It probably like would be really good to speak with someone about your project, or just like to kind of get a better sense of like knowing where you are at, and yeah, seeing kind of where you fall with the kind of, I guess, where that part of the field is at currently. But yeah, it completely depends on, I think, the like amount of stuff in the thesis that like is digital humanities for you to have a whole other advisor. But I think, yeah, it ultimately boils down to what you think would work best, and it's like all kind of, yeah, it's self-directed, as we have discussed, right? So that kind of decision is ultimately up to you.
Can I quickly chip in? Yeah, and I don't know. I'm chair of the complete department. I thought I would stop by because Nina can't be here. So if you have any questions along these lines that I can answer, but I'm not doing any kind of surveillance here. I feel a little uncomfortable. I just thought that I'd be here, and if you have a question. And this, what is your field, Cassandra?
Slavic literature.
Pardon?
Slavic literature.
Yeah. So I had a graduate student a couple of years ago who got into digital humanities and worked on lyric and analysis of lyric, and he also wrote code when he wrote the dissertation with me. I didn't really understand it, but it seems to have been very good. And he was in touch and then even also taught at the digital. I just put the web link in there. You might be familiar with that. And they have like consulting hours, or when you can drop in. I think most of the faculty in the humanities, and I think I know everybody in Slavic. Who are you working with?
No one right now. I'm a junior, so I'm.
Okay, so but if you work towards that, there are very few humanities faculty who work in digital humanities, really. But the digital humanities, the people who are there, they're really extremely helpful and really interested if you come with a project to work with you, to support you, etc. And I would do that as early as you want, if you have some kind of ideas. And then the last thing I say, also, get in touch with faculty and just go talk to them. When you feel like a passion, I think I might want to write an honors thesis, feel free, just go to the faculty and say, oh, I might want to write an honors thesis, and they will, most of the colleagues I know will encourage you and support you to get to the point where you can do it. So that's all my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I don't know if this helps, but I know that someone from the honors thesis workshop was working with, had as a second advisor someone who was from another institution. So you might also be able to do that if there's like some maybe some other people who are expert in the field. I know that Stanford has a literary lab. It's like specialized in digital humanities, so maybe that could help.
Awesome. And also thank you, Niklaus, for just jumping in. Wayne, you have the floor.
Hi, yes. So I just wanted to ask the panelists, how did you discover the most helpful pieces of literature throughout writing your thesis? And then secondary, did you happen to discover and collect more of a specific type of literature that was helpful?
Scholarly literature, like researchers writing, or?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, like any type of literature that was like helpful. Was there like a specific genre that I guess you found like you were collecting?
Do you mean like, I guess, secondary sources or primary sources?
Both would be helpful, actually.
Okay. I guess for primary sources, it was based on like what I wanted my main research question to be. I wrote on ekphrastic poetry, so my author was Sylvia Plath, and she had many ekphrastic poems. But as far as narrowing it down to 2, I looked for, on the one hand, like the poems that I felt were like most intriguing, and then on the other hand, to just kind of justify those 2 in particular, I looked for a pattern across them. So there's like a term that appears in both of them, even though they're related to separate paintings. And so that's how I was able to kind of justify connecting them. Just to make it specific, they both mention oracles. So I thought, oh, okay, well, this is a way to connect the 2. And then for scholarly literature, I looked at literature on the genre that I was dealing with, so like phrases. And then I looked at literature on the author that I was working with. And then as far as which pieces were most helpful, there were definitely some that would just appear numerous times in other people's citations. So like the definition for the genre of phrases, there were a couple that would just be numerously cited. And so that was one way for me to kind of pick up that, oh, this person's work has been influential because many of the articles reference them. Another way too was just if I felt like somebody had a really compelling argument, that for me would also make me kind of more inclined to want to include that piece. But yeah, if somebody's cited very often on the specific topic, that's usually a good indicator.
Yeah, I definitely second that very strongly. Yeah, you kind of, once you get the ball rolling, like I think the kind of initial steps that I took were like reading the things that I felt like I had some sort of knowledge of. And if that's not you, that's like also totally fine. The other really useful thing that I did is I collected reading lists from the professors that I talked to. So like I would just like set up a meeting and be like, hey, this is what I want to write on. Do you have any recommendations? And they'd be like, of course, and give me this like list of really long, like a really long list of like different articles and books I could check out. And then from there, like once you kind of start exposing yourself, I think what Fernando said is really, really helpful. Like you start to see stuff over and over again, and like, you know, names of scholars in particular. And you're like, okay, well, this guy must obviously have done something like super relevant to what I'm working on. And then, you know, tracking things down from there. So yeah, looking at footnotes, looking at bibliographies, looking at citations, all of that is super helpful. And I think like to your question of like what sort of literature I was coming across, I think it like completely depends on the project that you're doing. I think, you know, for me, I was looking at a lot of Latin text. I was looking at a lot of translations of Latin text, and I was also looking at a like enormous swath of like different types of secondary literature. So like, you know, articles, you know, adaptations, like anthologies, books, like, you know, everything ranging from traditional to like far less traditional scholarship. So I think like you'll probably have a better sense of the sort of thing you'll be finding once you kind of get started. But for me, it was super variable, right? Like, I mean, the type of thing that I was looking at, even though they were all kind of centered in the same like topical area, the like media types could be very different. So yeah, like just, I don't know, keep an open mind, like whatever you come across could potentially be useful. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit.
I would also say that my advisors played like a major role, giving me leads where to look at. But also something that really helped me was checking out reading anthologies, the Norton anthology, the Cambridge anthology, and I read two other anthologies that were collections, critical collections of essays. That was very helpful, especially for the footnotes, the leads that it gives you, and if you start following leads, that's very helpful. So yes, anthologies, and well, I also tried to read as much as I could of Marxist theory because I was working with that. So I tried to trace and have like a good understanding of what was the trend, what was the basis, and what was like that trend. What were theories, Marxist theories, Friedrich Jameson particularly doing right now, his latest book, to get a sense of where the theory was now. So that helped a lot too.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. So I see Kyle's hand up.
Yes, I see it's the end of our time. So I'll be quick, but I guess I'm a double major, and I'm curious if anyone else here is a double major, and did you have to think through which department do I do my honors thesis in? And this, I guess, more practical question is there a place where you can locate exactly what the requirements for the thesis are to help you kind of constrain your thinking? Like it has to be 40 to 60 pages. It has to be relevant to your major in this regard, these types of things.
I am not a double major, but I think maybe it would depend on if your thesis is going to include both majors in it somehow, then maybe it would be through the department that has the primary influence in your thesis. So just out of curiosity, what are your two majors if you want to share?
Yeah, comparative literature and East Asian religion, thought, and culture.
Okay, yeah. I could see it being through, I mean, what depends on what the nature of the thesis is, but I think it would work perfectly fine. I could see it in the comparative literature, just kind of looking at texts from different East Asian cultures, but I think that might not be the most critical thing, but I'm not too sure. But I think as long as it can be done, that's what matters the most. And I don't remember what your second question was.
Sorry, just if there was a resource, you were mentioning like the page limit, 40 to 60 pages, and I may have seen something like a link in one of the slides, but is there a place either on the Complet department website to see exactly what the rubric of the thesis would be, you know, in terms of page count, and it has to relate to the major topic in this specific way or something like that.
So yeah, I'm double majoring in complete and English. So I know that if you email the complete advisor, she will send you there's like 4 documents that with all the specifications about that. About the honors thesis. I remember reading that, but I ultimately decided to do it in English because so the English department has a 1-year program. One is a theory class, the other one is a workshop. But what's important is that if you decide to do it in comparative literature, I remember talking with the advisor last year, and he mentioned that you can actually enroll as a complete major. You can enroll in the English, in the first part of the English seminar, and to take it as a class, so that you participate with that like honors thesis workshop. I don't know if you can still do that, but I remember that was a possibility. So maybe that could be helpful because it's focused on writing a thesis.
My advice would be, sorry, just to talk to both advisors as a first step and say that you would like to do it like this. You talk to these 2 professors or so, they both will be involved, and then they tell you how to set it up.
Awesome. Well, we are just out of time. So that concludes our meeting for today, or our panel for today. We thank you all for coming. As we expected, it was going to be an intimate panel, so hopefully everyone had a chance to ask their questions. And if you still have any lingering questions, feel free to ask them in the Google form. We will also be, again, sharing all of the materials that we discussed, the slideshow, the perspectives, as well as a copy of all of our lovely panelist abstracts for you to reference in your future writing journeys. And with that, thank you all for coming so much, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this, guys. Yeah.